significance of our moving our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in a Cruz administration?
It's a great question. So I had pledged on day one in office, if I'm elected, to do 5 things. One of which is exactly what you just asked. On the first day in office, I will begin the process of moving the American embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, the once and eternal capital of Israel. Israel is the only country on earth where our embassy is not in the country's capital. Every other country, we put our embassy in their capital. But we don't in Israel because far too many people in the Middle East deny Israel's right to exist. And their object is to utterly destroy Israel, to drive them into the sea and recapture Jerusalem. Now, Congress passed legislation providing that the embassy should move to Jerusalem. But it included within it a presidential waiver. And one of the things we've seen is candidates in both parties, both Democrats and Republicans, have campaigned promising to move the embassy in Israel. And yet, inevitably, when they get to the White House, they don't do it. And they don't do it because their team comes to them and they say, well, you know, if you do this, other folks in the Middle East will be really, really unhappy. If you hadn't noticed, they're already pretty unhappy with us. And the single biggest difference, I believe, between me and the other very, very fine men and women that are standing on that debate stage that are running for president, is that with me, when I tell you I'm going to do something, I'm going to do exactly
has noticed that Russia is hostile, but also they are surging again. There's a resurgence that should be concerning from a federal, policy perspective. Talk to us about how you would deal with Putin and Russia, and keeping the backdrop of the fact that the president said in 2012, once he got reelected, he'd have a little more room. Russia.
Well, listen, Mark is a man of insight. He understands the world and foreign policy far better than our president. President Obama recently traveled overseas, and he said he doesn't believe in American leadership or America winning. He said, I don't have time for that. I got to say, I think FDR and JFK and Ronald Reagan were spinning in their graves to hear an American president say he doesn't believe in American leadership or American winning. I think our foreign policy principles should be really simple and straightforward. We should stand by our friends and allies, and we should stand up to our enemies. And let me, if I can, actually marry these two questions for a second. One of the reasons moving the embassy to Jerusalem is so important, number one, that's the respect, that's the dignity we give every other nation. There's no reason we should treat Israel worse than we treat other nations. But number two, that's a statement. You move the embassy to Israel. It is a statement to our allies across the world and to our enemies that we stand with Israel and we stand with our friends. Obama began his administration in the opening weeks. He sent back to the UK the bust of Winston Churchill. If I'm elected, I've already told the British ambassador I intend to ask for a return of Winston Churchill. But on the flip side, when it comes to our enemies, the Obama administration over and over again has demonstrated weakness and peace. And appeasement doesn't work. Weakness is provided. Now, Putin, I don't think Putin is a complicated man at all. Putin is a KGB thug. And I'll give him credit for candor. He has been very explicit. He said that he believes the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century was the demise of the Soviet Union. And what Putin is endeavoring to do is reassemble as much of that old Soviet Union as possible. Now, what should we be doing? Well, let's take, for example, let's go back to when Russia invaded Ukraine. My response at the time, what I urged President Obama to do, was two things. Number one, immediately install the anti-ballistic missile batteries that were scheduled to go into Poland and the Czech Republic. That was supposed to happen, but in 2009, President Obama and Hillary Clinton canceled them in an effort to appease Putin. Well, we discovered the appeasement didn't work, and that would immediately be a statement to all of Europe that we're standing with Europe against Russian aggression. But then the second key, there were at the time of the Ukrainian invasion, there were 22 applications pending in the Obama administration to export liquid natural gas. I think the president should have held a national TV press conference like he did last night, except actually talk about something. And I think he should have stood there with 22 applications and said, I'm approving all 22 right now. Now that would have done three things simultaneously. Number one, it would have helped the people of Ukraine and the people of Europe, who are desperately dependent on Russian gas. You want to talk about economic blackmail, if you can imagine facing a Ukrainian winter and Putin having the ability to cut off your gas so that your citizens can freeze to death. That's the dynamic they are there. If we can replace that with American natural gas, that helps free them from that economic blackmail. But number two, it hits Putin where it hurts. You know, our colleague, John McCain, has a great phrase for Russia. He refers to Russia as a gas station with a country attached. Putin is essentially a petro-tyrant. His aggression is funded by their energy resources, and so exporting LNG in significant quantities to Europe hits him directly with what he's using to fund his aggression. But third, it would create thousands of high-paying jobs here at home. That's the sort of American leadership. And listen, with regard to Russia, nobody in their right mind wants a shooting war between America and Russia. You don't want the world's two leading nuclear superpowers firing tanks at each other. That does not end up well. But Reagan demonstrated there are all sorts of tools of pressing back on Russia. The only thing Putin respects is strength. And the sad reality is Putin has taken a measure of the man in President Obama and has determined there is no credible threat whatsoever. He is a laughing stock. And that's dangerous. That is why we need a new president to keep this country safe.
Senator Cruz, this administration's foreign policy has created a refugee crisis, and that crisis has come to the upstate of South Carolina, where people of good conscience are asked to choose between, in some instances, helping those who are being persecuted because of their religious beliefs, and the fundamental preeminent function of government, which is national security. What would a Cruz administration do with the current refugee crisis?
Well, I think Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton's plans to bring tens of thousands of Syrian Muslim refugees to America is absolute lunacy. Let's go back to some basic facts. You look at the refugees that are streaming into Europe. One study showed that of those refugees, 77% were young males. Now that is a very odd demographic for a refugee. We know that at least one of the terrorists who committed this horrible Paris attack came among those refugees. And we know that ISIS has stated it intends to use those refugees to bring jihadists to America. But we also know that the Obama head of the FBI told Congress that the Obama administration cannot vet these refugees to determine whether they're terrorists. As he explained, and by the way, James Comey is who Obama appointed to lead the FBI. And Mr. Comey told Congress, he said, look, we don't have the information on who in Syria is part of ISIS, who's affiliated with the jihadists. So he said, we can query the databases until the cows come home. We don't have any information there to do any vetting. And yet, because of political correctness, this administration wants to bring people into this country who they know we cannot vet to determine whether they're terrorists. Look, you look at the San Bernardino terrorist attack. The woman came on a fiancé visa. Exact same vetting the Obama administration is saying, trust our vetting. By the way, her application for that visa, she put up a made-up address that doesn't exist, but they never even bothered to check the address. And they're saying, trust us to bring tens of thousands more to this country. That doesn't make any sense. Now, we are seeing in the Middle East a humanitarian crisis. And it is a humanitarian crisis that is the direct consequence of the failures of the Obama-Clinton foreign policy. They have set the stage for the rise of radical Islamic terrorism. You know, the ultimate solution to the refugee crisis in the Middle East is to utterly destroy and defeat ISIS. But in the meantime, with respect to these refugees, they ought to be resettled in the Middle East, in majority Muslim countries. And one interesting point that a lot of people don't know and that our friends in the media will never tell you. Do you know how much the United States is spending taking care of these refugees right now? About $1.2 billion. It is more than 10 times what any other country on earth is spending. Now, I got to say, I don't know about you, but I am sick and tired of hearing Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and Democratic politicians lecture the American people that we are somehow not kind or compassionate when we're spending more than 10 times as much as any country on earth to care for these people. But the first obligation of any commander-in-chief is to keep this country safe. So I've introduced in the Senate legislation that would put in place a 3-year moratorium on refugees coming from any country where ISIS or Al-Qaeda control a significant amount of territory. Right now, Democrats are blocking that legislation on the floor of the Senate. It is my hope that Republican leadership will bring it up for a vote on the floor, and we put every senator on record. We ought to put that legislation on President Obama's desk and force him to choose between political correctness and keeping this country safe.
From my perspective, and also from Christina, from Chapin's perspective, it appears that when you think about the immigration issue, it really is a national security issue as well. The porous borders have major implications from a national security standpoint. How do we start the conversation on immigration? And from our perspective, how do we first start the conversation on border security?
Tim, you are exactly right in that. Border security is national security. And listen, I represent Texas. We've got 1,200 miles, roughly, of border with the nation of Mexico. I've seen firsthand what's happening at the border when we don't have it secured, when we've got people crossing over. The law enforcement concerns, the national security concern. You know, the majority of the people coming across the border right now are what DHS calls OTMs, other than Mexicans. That is their classification. We've got people coming from special interest countries, coming from countries in the Middle East, and right now we're not doing the job of securing the border. Now, if I am elected president, we will secure it. And let me tell you in specific detail how we'll do that. I've rolled out a very detailed immigration plan. tedcruz.org. 11 pages, single space, chapter and verse. And by the way, it was drafted in very close consultation with Senator Jeff Sessions and Representative Steve King, who played critical roles in helping draft my immigration. The first thing we'll do is we will build a wall that works. The existing federal law requires over 700 miles of double-layered fencing on the southern border. The Obama administration has only allowed 36 miles to be built. What's interesting is federal law is actually quite robust on this. You don't necessarily need new statutes to come out of Congress. You just need a president to follow federal law. I will build the fencing that federal law requires. In addition to that, we'll triple the Border Patrol. We'll increase fourfold the fixed-wing and rotary-wing aircraft so we can monitor the border and direct the boots on the ground to where any attempted incursion is happening. We'll put in place a strong biometric exit-entry system on visas. You know, we just saw this terrorist coming on fiancé visas. You know, 40% of illegal immigration is not people crossing the border. It's visa overstays. It's people who come legally on a visa and never leave. Now, do you know Congress years ago passed a federal statute mandating a biometric exit-entry system, and the Obama administration just ignores it. They refuse to implement the federal statute. We will implement federal law. We will put in place a strong E-Verify so you can't get employment if you're not here legally. We will end catch and release. We will end welfare and government benefits for those who are here illegally. And we will deport criminal illegal aliens. Let me give you an amazing statistic. In the year 2013, the Obama administration released over 104,000 criminal illegal aliens. Included among those were 196 murders. Illegal aliens with homicide convictions that they released. Included among them were roughly 400 with sexual assault convictions. Included among them were over 16,000 with drunk driving convictions. I asked the head of Obama's Immigration Enforcement, the Senate Judiciary Committee, I asked her, I said, how many murderers did the Obama administration release this week? I don't know, she said. How many rapists? I don't know. How many drunk drivers? I don't know. In a Cruz administration, the answers to those questions will be 0, 0, and 0.
Senator Stewart from Greenville has a question about access to mental health, but while you're answering the question about access to mental health, there's also an undeniable connection between crime, particularly mass killings, and mental health. See if you can answer both of those at the same time. And if not, answer them separately.
Well, I will say the three of us working in Congress, we have a lot of experience with mental health issues. Because a whole lot of those people are nuts. Listen, when it comes to mental health is a serious challenge. And we need, in health care reform, number one, to repeal Obamacare, every single word. Number two, to pass meaningful health care reform so that health insurance is personal and portable and affordable, and people can have insurance where they can get things like mental health covered, but you empower the patient and you keep government from getting between us and our doctors. And let's talk about mental health in the context of guns and what's going on. You know, it's amazing, the reaction of the left. you see a terrorist attack like San Bernardino. Their first reaction is, we want to take away the guns of law-abiding citizens. And it's disconnected from reality. A couple of days ago, I did a Second Amendment rally in Iowa. And we announced our National Second Amendment Coalition. We've got over 24,000 members of the Second Amendment Coalition. By the way, anyone here, you want to sign up and join the Second Amendment Coalition, you can do it at tedcruz.org, tedcruz.org. It's tedcruz.org. But we rolled it out at a shooting range. And I got to say, the reporters who were with us, they were having heart palpitations. They were aghast. How can you talk about the Second Amendment following a terrorist shooting? Isn't this insensitive? And I told the gathered folks there, I said, look, I don't think it's my job to be sensitive to Islamic terrorists. And you don't stop the bad guys by taking away our guns. You stop the bad guys by using our guns. You know, one of the folks who's one of our national chairs of the Second Amendment Coalition, we have the head of Gun Owners of America, which has endorsed me and is supporting my presidential campaign. But we also have a fellow who founded Heroes Hunting. He's a veteran, and he takes vets and takes them hunting, and he was there. And he was packing a 45 on his hip. And he observed that there had been some chatter that this event was going to be a target for the terrorists. And he stood up and he said, I welcome them to come here. This may be the safest place in America. And we had 300-400 people, and I'd say 75% of them were veterans, and most of them had 2 or more firearms on them at the time. And this goes back to the point that I said at the outset about telling the truth. Here's one point that the Democrats and the media can't seem to figure out. Have you noticed that just about every one of these shootings happens in a gun-free zone? Ain't nothing bad guys like better than a bunch of unarmed victims. I'll tell you one of the things that will change if I'm elected president is beginning in 2017, we will protect the rights of our servicemen and women to keep and bear arms and protect us. Listen, if we can't trust soldiers to carry a firearm, we got a lot bigger problems. Look, Nidal Hassan at Fort Hood, as he walks through Fort Hood murdering 14 innocent souls, yelling, Aloha Akbar. I want you to think how different that would be if every one of those soldiers had a firearm in his side. You might have seen 1 or 2 killed, but it would end. You look at what happened in Chattanooga. The next time a jihadist shows up at a recruiting center in Chattanooga, he's going to encounter the business end of firearms wielded by a dozen Marines. And when it comes to the mental health component, you know, we had some votes this past week on gun issues, where the Democrats, as they always do, went after law-abiding citizens. You know, the amazing thing is they don't target bad guys. So let's rewind to 2013. You and I are both freshmen, brand new in the Senate. We saw the tragic shooting in Newtown, Connecticut. And what did the Democrats do? They immediately, rather than go after violent criminals, they decided they wanted to target the law-abiding citizens, go after our gun rights. I joined with Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley. We drafted legislation called the Grassley-Cruz legislation. It's also called the Law Enforcement Alternative. It focused on targeting the bad guys. So, for example, any given year, in 2013, there were roughly 50,000 felons and fugitives who tried to illegally buy a firearm. Do you know how many the Obama administration prosecuted? 44. Out of about